The definition of serfdom, which is in the title of Hayek's book, is a member of the lowest feudal class attached to the land owned by a lord and required to perform labor in return for certain legal or customary rights. In chapter 1, Hayek explains that he believes that people are oblivious to what is really happening in their surroundings and in their society because they have embraced the ideals of totalitarian principles. A really good quote that summarizes what Hayek is stating in this chapter is on page 25 of the book. It states, economic freedom without political freedom, which already won it, would not be worth living. In chapter 3, Hayek begins to explain to us about socialism and collectivism. Collectivism is a political theory advocating control, especially over production and distribution. Socialism and collectivism seem to go hand in hand with one another. In this chapter, Hayek begins to explain why he believes that the people think that planning or economic planning is inevitable. Because of technological advances, economic planning is becoming a necessity. He believes this is a myth and propaganda. In chapter 5, Hayek explains that the welfare and happiness of millions of people cannot be measured on a single scale of less or more. This cannot be accomplished by a few planners. This is not a democracy. In chapter 6, Hayek talks about rule of law, meaning in a free country, the government plays by a rule of law where the people know the rules of the land and can act accordingly because they know how the government will act. In chapter 7, Hayek believes that if a government is going to try and control an economy, a planned or directed economy, that it must also control most every aspect of an individual's lives. He uses the term totalitarianism to describe this idea. In chapter 8, Hayek explains that who someone becomes, how successful they can be, should be left up to the individual's own skills and luck rather than a few uninformed individuals. In chapter 9, Hayek explores the idea of security and freedom. The government should provide basic security for a society, but if too much security is provided or dictated, the citizens will begin to lose more and more of their individual freedoms. In chapter 10, there is a really great quote at the beginning of the chapter that really sums up what Hayek is stating and believes. The quote is, "All power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely." With this quote, Hayek is explaining that give a man or group of men too much power, and they will inevitably abuse it. In chapter 11, Hayek explains that in totalitarianism, the only way of making people react and serve the system is to make them believe it is in their best interest, almost as a sort of brainwashing the individuals. When I read this chapter, I kept thinking about cults in our society. In a cult, just like in totalitarianism, we no longer think for ourselves, but for the goal of society in general. In chapter 12, Hayek talks about the deep roots that socialist and socialist ideas instilled in Germany well before 1914. In chapter 13, Hayek explains that though many believe that the ideas of Nazi Germany couldn't happen in his country, England, that many ideas and conditions had already been adopted. In chapter 14, Hayek speaks about people not being restricted to economic demands. People want what they want, when they want it, and want the opportunity to work to get it. In chapter 15, Hayek explains that some natural order is necessary. Forcing individuals to adhere to some form of order is needed for the good of the society as a whole, but limitations to this are required. I believe that the pros for collectivism would be that everyone is equal, that there would be very little prejudice between individuals, and that there would be very good job security if the economy was a planned economy. Cons of collectivism would be that it restricts individualism as far as inventions and people being able to do what they want to do. There would be very few freedoms, and there would be no free markets in the economy. I also believe that Hayek would agree with the statement that more power than a good man should want or that a bad man should have.